The portraits are just for me. I didn't even used to call them anything. They started so much more ephemeral. They were just thought patterns that I returned to so I could entertain myself. At first it was just Mr. Johnson. Miles Johnson. Yeah. He was my neighbor growing up. We didn't talk much. He was a few years older and he never seemed interested in hanging out with me. Although, I guess I probably never seemed interested in hanging out with him either. He was tall and big and usually wore camouflage, so I always thought of him as a good old Southern boy, if you know what I mean. But even into his adulthood, I never talked to him, but I saw him around town, and he always had his work boots and camo on, and always...
That portrait?
Right. One day, I was looking for Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. I had a young man come in looking for it, so I took him to the stacks to help find it, but it wasn't there. The library only has one copy. I know that for sure. So I put him on the wait list, and I looked up to see who had checked it out, and damn if it wasn't Miles Johnson. I didn't even have to scroll to see that he had checked out a few other Baldwins, in The City and the Pillar by Gore Vidal. And then I saw that he had requested The Price of Salt by Patricia Highsmith, and I thought, that's a gay reading list if I ever saw one. Maybe he isn't the good old Southern boy that I thought he was. I looked at his social media pages, and he didn't have any pride flags or posts about being gay or anything. But sure enough, when June came around, I saw him making a really elaborate post coming out on Instagram, and I felt this weird connection to him. Like, I was the first person that he told. He quoted James Baldwin in his post. You remember when Angela Weed passed away? Well, she was in charge of monitoring and distributing holds. We still have to do it manually because we're moving to a different system. And I started to notice patterns for a lot of people. This pregnant woman, she checked out baby naming books and parenting books, but also books about sex and cooking and an LSAT prep book. It felt like people were telling me about themselves more than they had in any other way. I write them down so I can remember them. And some of them are really beautiful. People in this town go through a lot. I like to read through them. It's like looking at works of art, like stories or movies about this place.
And you have one of these portraits for me?
Yes.
And that's where you got all that information about me. The very personal information about me.
Yes. What people read says a lot about them.
And what about my diagnosis?
What diagnosis?
Well, your note said that Cyclomania was a restaurant friendly to celiacs.
You checked out 2 gluten-free cookbooks. The only 2 we have, actually. I didn't know you had celiac until just now. Although, celiac is a common reason why people are gluten-free. Celiacs are extremely sensitive to gluten, so if a restaurant is celiac-friendly, then anyone avoiding gluten should be safe to eat there.
You got all that from the portrait?
I guess.
Okay. Tell me some personal information that you got from other people's portraits.
No! Why? I'm not going to do that. That feels too private.
Too private? That's rich coming from you. You just told me you were the first to know that Miles Johnson was gay. That feels pretty private.
I didn't tell anyone. That's important. I don't want you to think that I'd share anything about you with anyone else. I wouldn't. The portraits are just for me.
Except when you want to leave a creepy note in somebody's library book.
It wasn't supposed to be creepy.
Well, your note said, I hope the time and distance from your ex-husband has given you peace. No one knows I got divorced. Except my husband. And he's far too ashamed to let anyone know about this. And I know for a fact he hasn't stepped foot into the library. No less checked out some books.
Well, a few months ago, you checked out a number of self-help books around finance. 6, actually. And then you checked out Will I Ever Be Free of You by Carl McBride, and then The Narcissist in Your Life by Julie Hall. Both of those are books that...
You memorized the books that I checked out months ago?
I'm just good at remembering things. But both of those books have large sections on divorcing narcissists and other pathological personalities. That, coupled with your books on finances, made it seem like you were getting your affairs in order to separate financially. And then you started checking out books about sexuality, and I thought you might be interested in a date. And given your recent reading history, I figured we might be a good match. I do like Stephen King.
Clearly, you have all this figured out. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't call the cops.
I didn't do anything wrong. I just asked you on a date. You don't have to say yes. I mean, just ask, do you want a date? It's not like I put a threat in there. It was just a no.
You left a note addressed to me in the library book I had on hold, alluding to my divorce, assuming sexuality that I haven't even begun to figure out myself, and naming a diagnosis that I got 2 weeks ago. And then you invited me to come get dinner with you and listed 3 restaurants 5 minutes away from where I live.
You walked to the library.
What?
You're implying that I know your address or took it from the library, but you walk to the library. I see you coming in sometimes when it's raining. Your umbrella's always really wet, and not the kind of wet that you get from walking in from your car. I don't know your address, Maddie. I can't see it in the system. I wouldn't do that. That's private.
That's private, but my sexuality isn't.
I made easy conclusions from your reading habits.
My address is private, but my divorce is fine. My medical history is fine. Those things are fair game for you to use to shoot your shot. Well, thank God you didn't steal my address from the library computer. That makes all of this A-okay.
I don't like it when you yell. It's frightening.
Don't you think I was frightened reading your little note?
We can both be afraid. Maddie, I don't think you're meaning to, but you are being extremely aggressive right now.
I'm not aggressive!
You don't get to decide that. I'm the one that's experiencing the fear.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
You can be afraid.
I know. I'm sorry if my note frightened you. It wasn't my intention.
I know.
You're not like him.
Excuse me?
You were upset and you raised your voice, but you stopped when I asked you to. If you're worried about being like him, you're not.
Thanks.
I really like your portrait, Maddie. I don't know if it's real, but it paints you as a genuinely good person. I'd prefer it if you'd just say no to the date and not call the cops on me.
I'm not going to do that.
Well, but I didn't do anything that they could arrest or fine me for.
I'm not going to say no. I'd like to go on a date with you.
Really?
The first place you listed, Cyclomania. I love that place. It's one of my favorite restaurants. I didn't mean to yell. It's not who I am.
I know.